Operation Wandering Souls took its name during the war as part of the propaganda program run by 1st Australian Psychological Operation Units to encourage Vietnamese guerrillas to give up fighting. Over 30 years later, wishing to heal the wounds of war, some Australian veterans have started their own Wandering Souls program, but with a much more different meaning. That is to help search for the remains and identify the burial sites of Vietnamese war soldiers.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk Vietnam. More than 40 years have passed since Australians were last year in Vietnam serving as soldiers fighting in the then Vietnam War. The horror of the battlefield still lingering very vividly in their minds until today. And now, instead of letting the past torment them, however, a group of Australian veterans, now researchers, are beginning the process of reconciliation and also improving on the relations between Vietnam and Australia. Now, in Talk Vietnam today, we have the very honor of welcoming to our studio Daryl Dahir. He's a member of the research team at the University of New South Wales at the Australian Centre for the Study of Armed Conflict and Society. He's going to share with us more on his experience with the research project, as well as the many stories that have gone along with it. Hello, Daryl.
Thank you, and it's good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Great. I've had a great day travelling from Vung Tau to Hanoi.
Yes, well, definitely talk about the significance of your trip coming here this time. Can you first of all kind of tell us a little bit about how did you come? I mean, I understand you are an Australian veteran having experience here in the Vietnam War.
Yes, I'm a veteran of the war. I was a professional soldier. I was in Vietnam. I came in November 1969 to November 1970. I went home to Australia for about 6 months and came back for another 7 months before all Australian combat forces were withdrawn in December 1971. I'm a part of a team, but the original team was Dr. Bob Hall and Dr. Andrew Ross, who were both analysing the Australian operations in Vietnam, psychological warfare, political warfare and propaganda by Australians in the province during the war.
Tell us more about what you did.
I came over with the 8th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. I worked in the operational headquarters and liaised with local and American forces, as I had previous experience in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia during the Indonesian confrontation. I was one of 21 people that started in the Australian Psychological Warfare Unit, and we worked in the province right through to the end of the war. I served there for 8 months in field operations, working around in the villages, talking to families, saying you have a son or a daughter or a father who's in the Viet Cong or the People's Army, and I was telling them the opportunities if they returned to the government, then how they could be reconciled into society. We did that in several ways. We dropped leaflets telling the benefits of returning to the government. We did broadcasts from the air. We also played on superstitions. And that's where the original sort of term for us, Wandering Souls, was about. We understood that if you died violently or you died where you were not known, then your spirit would wander. So that's where the Wandering Souls came from.
Operation Wandering Souls was developed by Australian veterans Daryl Dahir, Bob Hall and Andrew Ross, who have been studying the Australian involvement in the American War for over the last 7 years. They believe their efforts to clear and lay the ghosts to rest is a highly significant act for Vietnamese people. Under this research, military researchers have identified the burial sites of more than 3,906 martyrs killed by Australian and New Zealand soldiers in Vietnamese fields and jungles and rubber plantations. The researchers can also put the names of 535 soldiers to their burial sites by matching battlefield barriers mapped by Australian soldiers with Vietnamese records. The team then wanted to provide this information to the Vietnamese government as a way of thanking the Vietnamese people for assisting Australia in finding the remains of 6 Australian soldiers.
The Wandering Souls project began out of your meeting up with Dr. Bob Hall and also Dr. Ross,
yes.
who were also Australian veterans, and this just came out of a conversation over coffee that you knew about where all the Vietnamese People's Army soldiers were being buried in the Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu area, and this, of course, would help very much with families of fallen soldiers here in Vietnam.
We know how important it is in the culture. I certainly did from psychological operations. So we decided that we would call our project Operation Wandering Souls, and not in a propaganda way to frighten people, but in a way to bring the souls home to families. And we looked at how we would do that, and so we came up with some plans. Well, the original data, what we did with it is General Vinh, who I think at the time was the Vice Chief of the Vietnamese Defence Force, I think. He was visiting Australia, and at that time Senator Faulkner was our Defence Minister. So our Defence Minister presented the data to General Vinh. Dr. Bob Hall and myself came to Vietnam. We presented the data to the National Veterans Association of Vietnam here in Hanoi. We gave it to the Veterans Association in Vung Tau. Mm-hmm. We gave it to 2 military units, so we fought against the 33rd Regiment, another unit called D445. We also gave it to the Department of Labour, Invalids and Social Affairs. We tried to give it to as many people as possible, but all that did was give them the location of 3,906 bodies were buried.
Why is it exactly 3,906? I mean, obviously so many Vietnamese people or Vietnamese soldiers of the Vietnamese People's Army laid down their lives. Why that exact number?
Well, that's how many Australians have to do reports after every action. So this is actually bodies that they had that they buried. There could have been other people who were wounded, crawled away and died and we never found them. There could have been others that were wounded, taken away and subsequently died and were buried by People's Army soldiers. But the trouble with that is that sometimes they had I suppose, battlefield graveyards during the war. And during the war, they may have been bombed accidentally by artillery or aircraft. And sometimes the people who knew where they were may have been killed later somewhere else. If you take the 33rd Regiment, which I think is a very famous regiment, they tell us that that unit had 4,000 killed. There is 1,000 of them. They don't know who their names are because the records have been lost. They do have the names of 3,000.
Yes.
So we worked with them and worked out where some, because Australians only had 2 battles against them, we worked out where they were buried, who their names were, and we were able to give them the names of 120 of their soldiers and to the place of burial.
This is not the first time Darryl has returned to visit the Binh Ba battlefield in Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu province. He's accompanied by Vietnam Cuu, a former soldier from 33rd Regiment. Cuu is very instrumental in helping match Vietnamese records with the battlefield barriers mapped by Australian soldiers.
During the war in this schoolyard, there was 43 people buried, which were subsequently taken to the Go Cat Cemetery. Mr. Cuu gave us a list of their dead, and as Australians only had 2 battles against them, we were able to give them the location and names of people buried there for 120 We believe it's a moral and obligation to do it.
This is the memorial site of the 33rd Regiment. During the war between 1965 to 1979, the regiment lost 4,000 people, but only 2,100 have been named. The Battle of Binh Ba was one of the major battles fought by Australians during the war. During the battle, 96 Vietnamese soldiers were killed, 53 from 33rd Regiment.
This battle with the Australians was well planned, well executed, and the unit was told to attack the Australians on that day.
Being embarrassed by Vietnamese efforts to help recover the Australian missing in actions, given that Vietnam has up to 600,000 soldiers missing, the Australians' vets said it seemed to them only fair that they should do everything to help the Vietnamese recover some of their missing in actions.
Qua cái tâm sự, qua trao đổi và cũng như là những cái về thông tin để hai bên á, thì chúng tôi thấy họ có nhiều thiện chí, họ thay đổi rất nhiều về cái suy nghĩ và cái tình cảm họ rất là quan tâm tìm những cái cũ để mà giúp cho mình có những cái thông tin cụ thể cho đối với những người đã mất.
For Daryl, this map is valuable property. In the past, it helped him to stage the operation. Now it is being used to facilitate the job of the researchers to match the fastidious record, keeping of the Vietnamese military to give names to the anonymous dead.
Thank you very much for showing us that map. It definitely is very helpful, and I am sure it proved very efficient in matching up with the action data as well as the data on the 36,000 encounters that you told us about. And I understand you also have, processed this map or the data into a more kind of compact form.
This particular one is that originally we gave them the location of 3,906 bodies were buried. We then went through those intelligence summaries because the documents have gone back and we've now said, here is a name. So what I've done in this particular list here is to give a date. We know the time of death.
The time of death as well.
We know the referencing system. The documents on them will tell them the unit they're in. So then we have their name, and quite often they'll have another name as well. In Australian, we would call that a nickname. But here, like the documents we found and delivered to a mother the other day, he had 3 names. But we've got some here with 5 names.
Wow.
So, and then I've made reference to the Australian Intelligence Summary, and whatever information will help find the family.
So this is like a combination of all of the different data that you had. So time of death as well as the name, if available, and other name, alternative names, the unit they were based in.
And sometimes here, their job.
Their job as well.
So it might have been their adjutant or a platoon commander or a squad leader.
This is the 535 that we talked about.
Yes. And, in here is all the 33 regiment names. And so with 2 battles, the only people we don't have the names of is the people at New Lay, because those names have been lost.
I'm sure a lot of people who are watching, I mean, there may be people who have had family members who had fallen in the war in that particular zone that we're talking about where the Australians were based. How would Vietnamese people be able to access this data if they wanted to? I mean, I know that you and your team had passed this on to certain addresses here in Vietnam. Where could they find it?
I think there's another place that is quite helpful. I'm told by many people there's a centre called the Maran Centre.
The Maran Centre.
And it is one of the more popular centres for people looking for their missing in action. People can contact them.
Now, going back to the research with the Australian Centre for Study of Armed Conflict and Society at the University of New South Wales, what were some of the challenges that you encountered?
We left here in 1971, the last combat soldiers. Then the land changes. You know, the villages grow, new roads, farms. So in looking at it, we plotted them on military maps of the time, but knowing that has very little use for the current generation, is that we then said we would plot it on Google Earth. So, because we have technology these days, so we converted a military referencing system to where they were buried to latitude and longitude, and then converted that into Google Earth to plot it. This is the area where the Australians operated. Vung Tau, Phúc Tui province in those days, now called Berea Vung Tau. The size of these dots indicates the bigger the dot, the more people that are killed and buried at these sites. On the 18th of August 1966, 395 people killed. It was a battle that went very vicious.
Of course, very updated and more attuned
and you can see the current land usage.
Exactly.
So there might be, where there was jungle, there may be farms. You know, where there was bare land, there might be rice.
The terrain has changed very much.
And quite a lot of small hills have been demolished to make road base for roads. So it was important to put it in a way that current generation can sort of see it. So Google Earth seemed to be the natural way of doing it.
But going back a little bit now, you mentioned earlier that you know the significance of how the Vietnamese would want to find the remains of their fallen soldiers very much through your own experience in the psychological warfare. Tell us more about this experience. Tell us about some of the stories, some of your encounters with the families through being in this Bà Vũng Tàu area. How did it affect you, or how did it kind of make this decision to conduct further research and do this job more significant?
Obviously many experiences of talking to families during the war, where a lot of soldiers, Australian soldiers in particular, were in the jungle and had very little to do with the Vietnamese people, because the villages were looked after by the Republic of Vietnam Regional Force soldiers, and the Australian soldiers looked after the jungle. My job was working around the villages and working with village officials and police and regional force people. On one occasion I went to the village of Phuc Hai, which is on the coast. It's a fishing village, and the police chief told me that a father had come to him and told him that the Viet Cong had come to him during the night and told him that earlier in the night his son had been killed by Australians. The father was requesting that the body be returned to him. I saw the Australians, which had a small base, temporary base outside the Phuc Hai. The soldiers were involved in the ambush, took me to the sites, and there was 3 soldiers had been killed, and Vietnamese soldiers. We then, they showed me where the graves were. It was in sand. I and the father, unfortunately we didn't take any digging implements, so the father and I dug the body out. The first body we dug out was his son. We dug the body out. I wrapped him in a poncho. We put him in a vehicle. We took them back into Phuc Hai, and I took him to the father's house. The look of grief on the father's face, I'll always remember.
As part of the Wandering Souls project, the Australian veterans, now researchers at the University of New South Wales, have been encouraging many of the Australian veterans keeping the artifacts and keepsakes belonging to the Vietnamese soldiers that they buried to return them. And on this occasion, on the trip of Daryl back here in Vietnam, a particular story happened, a very touching story that I got a chance to witness myself, and that is an Australian veteran. His name is Lawrence Wilderboller. He went back to Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu, returning. He had been keeping for 40 years 2 diaries, 2 notebooks, and also a scarf, which he believes belonged to 2 Vietnamese soldiers. And we'll find out more about this story in the following.
Today, Daryl paid a visit to Long An Commune in Dong Nai Province with a special guest, Lawrence Wilderboller, who has returned to Vietnam for the second time. Last time he was here 43 years ago, he found from the detritus of the battlefield a Vietnamese soldier's handwritten poetry, another notebook with details of a soldier's life, and a scarf. Captured by the beautifully illustrated poetry, he decided to take them home without knowing that it would become so important. Lawrence went to the war in Vietnam as a driver repairing and recovering vehicles for the Australian Army. Torn between what he had been told in training and what he saw in reality, Lawrence's views on the war started to change.
I joined the Army when I was 17 in 1965 because I was 17 and stupid, had no idea. And I only knew about Vietnam, the propaganda that I'd seen from the Americans and the Australians about the communist threat and all the other rubbish that they peddled us.
In a way, Vietnam, the war, has never left him for the whole 43 years. The Operation Wandering Souls project was an opportunity for Lawrence to find peace of mind. He has always wanted to return the keepsakes to the Vietnamese people. Thanks to Daryl and Colonel Nguyễn, they tracked the notebook to its rightful owner. This is 85-year-old Nguyễn. The last time he saw her boy was in September of 1917, a year after his notebook and scarf showed up at Wilderboller's base.
I'm sorry you lost 2 sons in the war.
Phan Văn Bền, her son, had come home from the jungle to ask for mooncakes in advance of the Mid-Autumn Festival. No one was able to determine the location of his remains after that.
We had to meet under these circumstances, but I'm very happy to return to private possessions. I've been wanting to do this for a long, long time.
Mấy ông này giữ được cái kỷ niệm của con tôi, thì giờ thì tôi được cái kỷ niệm này là tôi cũng quá quý, mà tôi cũng quý mấy ông này để cố gắng mà giữ cái kỷ niệm này cho tôi. Bây giờ nó trở lại tôi cũng như thằng con tôi sống lại. Má giữ cái này nè, má thanh thản, ông cũng phải thanh thản nương tâm, ông không phải trắng bít nữa.
We know that it's been 43 years. This is the first time you've come back since you were based here. How do you feel now?
Extremely relieved, particularly under the circumstances where I could return these documents to the mother. Even when I was here in 1969, after I came to the conclusion that we were here for the wrong reasons, or certainly from my perspective, I started to look at the country as a tourist. I thought the country was beautiful, the people were really, really nice, and that added to my problem of what we were doing here. So I'm very happy to be back.
Why did it take 43 years for you to come back?
I think a lot of soldiers are reluctant to return to the battlefield, and I had no reason to come back because of the pain that was involved in being here the first time. So I was not in a hurry to get back, but I have a reason to be back now, and that's fortunately has given me a whole new perspective on Vietnam and allowed me to get rid of a few ghosts.
During the past 43 years, you said you'd been haunted by the war in some sense. Were there any time that you felt a sense of guilt?
All the time. When I left Vietnam, there was a sense of guilt, yes, and that's haunted me.
Do you feel that after today, maybe that sense of guilt might lessen a bit?
It will ease up. It will, yes, yes. I have a connection with a Vietnamese woman, an 85-year-old Vietnamese woman. To me, that has been very, very important. The feelings are just amazing, and I'm returning home. It's incredible.
Now the incense Lawrence offers on Bain's altar goes some way to relieving the heavy burden of remorse on the veterans' hearts, and Bain can be reunited with his family.
So Daryl, tell us about this particular, I think we can call it a success story almost, of Lawrence being able to find the origin or the family of the soldier that had kept his notebook for so many years.
An Australian newspaper wrote an article on our Wandering Souls project on the 24th of April last year. Lawrence saw the article and liked it. He realised he still had these documents, which he'd kept for 43 years, and he contacted us in about the beginning of November last year. We had some photocopies of the data, and we'd previously had a contact with Colonel Chien, so we sent the data to her. We sent the soldiers' names, the 3 names we had for him. She came back and told us earlier this year that she had found the mother, and she named the mother. And then when we looked down the documents in the soldier's handwriting, we found his mother's name, and it was the same mother.
It matched.
So not only did their names match, the mother matched. And we were pleased to find out that she was 85 years old. She wasn't in good health at the time. She had 4 daughters and 2 other sons living. She had a second son killed during the war. We originally thought that both books had belonged to her son.
Man.
The scarf had been in the book, which was definitely her son's, but Colonel Chien only came back a few days before we came to Vietnam to tell us that the writing in the book was from a very educated person from the north, and so it wasn't the same person.
Yes.
But they were found. We know the Australians never killed the person, and it was only when we got here and spoke to the mother, she told us that although these documents were found in February, March 1969, her son wasn't killed until 1970. And he actually was killed near a Thai military area in Bien Hoa province, and he stood on a mine and was blown up. And the People's Army Forces had brought to the mother his watch and some other artefacts. So here the mother could touch something that was written by her son, a scarf. We don't know whether the mother had given the scarf to him, but it was something that belonged to him and she could touch.
Yes.
Very moving.
Yes, for me personally, I was very fortunate to be able to follow your delegation, and in watching this particular return of a keepsake, and the mother is obviously in her elder days now, and she was very touched, and I found that you were all touched as well. I talked to Lawrence as we've seen, and he was basically not kind of settled down enough in order to talk about his feelings. How about for you now? What do you think of that particular experience now, and the fact that your research is helping to make those success stories become real?
Well, from the research point of view, we're very pleased. The whole team's very pleased. You weren't there, but we went back the next day and had a feast with the family. Wonderful. So we really had a feast of the martyr. But we also celebrated the other son's life. And this story is also going to be told in Australia because we had Australian television cover it. And so this will get a wider publicity in Australia, which we hope will bring more artefacts out, and we can return it to families.
We also have the second notebook with the poem too. What do you think about the poem when you read it?
The poems, when I found out about them, and I think it's interesting, and I have some here.
Yes, do show us.
The ones that I particularly like. Is this one.
Yes.
And it's also, because of the drawings on it, it's also about symbols.
Xuân Sang.
This branch, to me, is, first of all, it's pointing south. So it's looking, you know, it's obviously, by looking at the colour of the blossoms, it tells me that it is is it a peach tree they have here in the north?
Yes, the red peach blossom.
The red peach blossom. Where in the south, it would be a yellow, different colour.
Yep.
So, and a different fruit. So that tells me that it came from someone from the north, where the soldier we've returned the artefacts about came from the south,
so,
which we know. So we know this is someone different.
The notebook was penned under name Thanh Phong and acted as a war diary. His loved ones never saw the book and the delicate drawing that illustrated it. But the Australian did, and even though he couldn't read it, he knew a powerful part of its meaning. As well as love, the Vietnamese soldier wrote of his patriotic duty and how he was on the front line of a battle that he hoped would defeat the foreign enemy and reunite the country. Together with other soldier diaries like Miễn and Đặng Thùy Trâm, the poems have once again stirred a wave of patriotism among Vietnamese people. Colonel Nguyễn Thị Tiến, who has worked for decades to trace Vietnam's war dead and artifacts, is confident that some hints about his relative and background could help return the poetry to the family.
Trong sổ thì tôi biết được là vì trong có một người liệt sĩ này có một cô em gái tên là Hường, và trong chiến tranh thì có một người tên là Kim Dung cõng anh ấy ra cõng để chạy để đi về hậu cứ, thì anh bảo là xin chị Kim Dung là để anh lại để anh ấy đánh, và chị Kim Dung cứ chạy đi, còn anh lại anh giữ lại bình yên cho, hy sinh mình để giữ bình yên cho cả đoàn quân, nhưng mà họ không chịu thì ông bảo có bài thơ Tình Đồng Chí, thì biết đâu cái chị Kim Dung này chưa hy sinh, biết đâu chị Kim Dung này là một cựu chiến binh, rồi biết đâu chị Hường này là em của cái liệt sĩ Thanh Phong này, và biết đâu Thanh Phong là tên của anh ấy, thì rất nhiều tư liệu mà ta có thể tìm được.
One of the most significant poems is Letter in Spring. The soldier addressed it to my love who is at home.
Từ buổi ấy xa em biển biệt, thấm thoát thoi đưa mấy độ xuân về. Hỡi em yêu còn ở chốn quê, chắc ngoài ấy đang tung trời vui cánh én. Viết thư cho em đầu xuân 68, ngoài quê hương em đang rét run người. Xuân trong này cũng lạnh lắm em ơi, đừng khóc nữa nhớ anh nhiều em nhé. Nhớ buổi ra đi nhìn nhau lặng lẽ, giọt lệ sầu thương cho tiếng tiễn đưa. Mà hôm nay đã mấy độ xuân về, nhớ em lắm, nhớ quê hương đang bừng nổi dậy. Tàu chiến Mỹ ăn đòn bốc cháy, giặc nhà trời cũng vùi xác biển đen. Còn trong này anh đứng giữa tiền duyên, giao thừa đến vui tiếng kèn xung trận. Đêm hành quân mừng xuân 68, vắng đào thơm mà ngát nhụy mai vàng. Trên người anh rung cành lá ngụy trang, theo nhịp bước đoàn quân xuống đường quyết thắng.
To think of the meaning, I mean, I know that you traveled. I heard a story about the fact that when you found out about this particular notebook from Lawrence, you had traveled to get it translated.
Well, what we did is that I left Canberra, in the nation's capital where I live in Australia. I travelled to Lawrence's place, which is about 700 kilometres away.
700 kilometres.
Yes, and talked to him and picked them up. Then I drove another 200 kilometres to another person who is a Vietnamese speaker, who briefly read them and told me what they were about. And then we came back, and then I photographed them, I've copied them, and I'm getting a full translation done of them. And we had a couple translated which appeared in the Australian newspaper recently. And there's another story about this in the Australian papers today.
Yes, wow.
So
it's
created, I'd say 95% interest in it. There's a couple of people who are a bit grumpy.
You seem to be so passionate about this process of helping to find, I mean, traveling all that way and really trying to find the origins of this notebook. Now, are there any kind of similar stories?
When Australian soldiers may have killed someone, they may have taken documents off them and haven't handed them in.
Really? Like keepsakes almost?
Yes, and there's several that I know of. This soldier was killed by a New Zealand soldier who worked with Australians. We know where he was killed, what time he was killed, and where he's buried. The New Zealand soldier took a negative out of his pocket, had it developed, and we can tell by the photograph that, first of all, he's in the uniform, so he came from North Vietnam. We can look at his rank and we know he's a sergeant, and we can look at his insignia and we know he's in medical. So he's a sergeant medical person who's been killed by New Zealanders, and that New Zealand soldier would like to return that negative and photograph to the family.
I really would like to tell any audience out there who, you know, might maybe recognize this photo, if, you know, perhaps through our show, through this talk, if you would know any information about this particular photo or the family of this particular man who had fallen under the gun of a New Zealand soldier, that we do have information on this photo, and it would be great if we can get a lead on that.
Yes.
And this work that you're doing, the research, I feel it's reconciliation in itself, and
yes,
it adds to the process of improving on the relations between Vietnam and Australia. Exactly.
Again, after the war, which I think is very important, is that Australia was one of the first Western countries to recognise the Democratic Republic of Vietnam.
Yes.
Our Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, at the time, and it's actually 39 years this year, and next year will be 40 years, and I hope there'll be celebrations between Australia and Vietnam, and I'm sure there will be, and you know, and Australia and Vietnam are friends. We give Vietnam aid, and there is particularly troubling times in the region, particularly with Spratly Islands.
Yes.
And we hope that Australia will stand by Vietnam and be its friend.
What are some of your next plans?
Next plans are with this, we may not be able to do much more without the data. We would like a Vietnamese academic to work with us. For them, it's research to get the names and things. It'll help us with data matching. For them, they can write academic papers, talk about cooperation internationally, and again, it would be good at some conference next year if it was 40 years cooperation between the countries. There would be some veterans in Vietnam who would still not like Australians, and there are some veterans in Australia that would
not want to talk about Vietnam.
Would not talk about Vietnam. But Lawrence, who never wanted to come back, I spoke to him this year and I said, let me tell you, this is going to help you heal any problems you ever had thinking about the war. And you heard him. He said, this is one of the best things he's ever done.
Yes, and he says he's going to come back more. He told me this is like his second home now. So thank you very much, Daryl, for coming here, joining our story, mostly for your contribution to what you're doing here is great. I mean, for Vietnam, for the people of Vietnam who had families, members fallen during the war, and I hope you have all the best of luck in not finding, also particularly finding the owner of this this poem, this notebook, but also kind of bringing more artifacts, more keepsakes back to Vietnam and bridging the relationship between Vietnam and Australia.
And I represent our team, and we thank you for the invitation, and we hope we can do more.
Yes, all the best of luck. Thank you
you
very much.
Thank you.
That was our edition of Talk Vietnam on the stories of Australian veterans, now researchers doing all they can in order to kind of bridge Vietnam and Australia. They're finding the remains of Vietnamese soldiers who had fallen down during the war. We hope you enjoyed the edition as much as I have, and we'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam.